Yes. So, welcome to February. We are shifting our theme from enoughness to aging. And since dementia is one of those dramatic curveballs that have significant consequences on the individual experiencing it and on the family, um, I invited my friend and colleague, Maribeth, to join us here today. And it's really going to be whatever we want this to be. Maribeth has so much knowledge, but really we have this ability to be with her and pick her brain. So there'll be lots of opportunity to ask questions, and if you don't understand anything, just feel free to raise your hand. Um, Maribeth and I met many years ago studying MBSR through our training, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And we share our similar birthplace of New York, and we both have fathers who were New York City firefighters. So there's a certain culture that comes with that. That we were like, oh, we're going to be buddies. So, and Maribeth is a board certified psychiatric nurse practitioner with a doctoral degree in nursing. And she serves as the director of Hospice of the Valley's Dementia Program, which has received national and international awards for its innovative approaches to dementia care. And she was selected to serve on the expert panel for advanced dementia for the National Alzheimer's Project Act in Washington, D.C. She's been inducted as a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, and her commitment to improving dementia care was initially inspired by her own experience as a family caregiver, like many of you, sharing in the journey with a loved one with dementia from diagnosis to death. And as I said before, she's an MBSR teacher and practitioner, certified through University of Massachusetts Medical School. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Maribeth, and you let me know if you need anything.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So, by a show of hands, has anybody here had or has currently a loved one or a friend with dementia? So you've had some exposure to this experience? Trying to see everybody. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So that's kind of the point here, is that dementia has really touched all of our lives. And if it has not yet, when we look at the statistics, pretty much we know that it will be. And Dr. Maya Angelou has that great phrase about when we know better, we do better. And so that's why it gets so exciting to share information with you. Scientifically, where are we when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia? Well, we don't have any cures yet. We're still trying to figure out the causes, and there's many etiologies for the different types of dementia. As far as the medications that we have, they're kind of at best meh, and they come with risks, but we're moving forward with that. So it really raises the critical question for now: how do we provide compassionate, skillful care for every person living with dementia who didn't choose this, and their care partners? Because for many of us, being a dementia care partner is one of the hardest things that we'll be called to do. And not to paint it all with darkness, because it can be richly rewarding and there's so much to learn there as well. So I thought what we would do, just to bring everybody on the same page, because everybody's got different levels of exposure, is I would start with some general information, okay? And then we can go in many different directions. So when we talk about, the most frequently asked question is, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? So dementia is that umbrella term that is talking about these changes in the brain and cognition that affect many domains. There are many types of dementia. At this point, there's over 100 types of dementia, but the most common type of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so Alzheimer's is one type of dementia, but there are many. Maybe you know somebody who has what's called dementia with Lewy body, or Parkinson's disease dementia, or vascular dementia. Think about the number one killer of Americans is heart disease, right? So when we think about the cardiovascular system right here, so then we have inches away our cerebrovascular system. If our cardiovascular system isn't in such great shape, what are we thinking about the cerebrovascular system in the same person? And then a subset specialty of mine are the frontotemporal dementias. These start out hitting specific parts of the brain and oftentimes hit people between the ages of 45 and 60 when dementia isn't suspected. And so these people often wind up in jail as middle-aged crazies. I'm going to turn my thing off here. Or in locked psych facilities. And then all of a sudden, if they're lucky enough to have their brain scanned, they'll see that there's this shrinkage, atrophy in the frontal and temporal lobes. So speaking about dementia in a general way, oftentimes we're pulling from the knowledge we have related to Alzheimer's because that's the most common type. So you know what the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is age. So age 65 and older, they think about 1 in 9 people have Alzheimer's disease. And by the time we get to 85 and older, which is one of the fastest growing segments in our population these days, they suggest that a third of people who are 85 and older have some type of dementia in some stage. So it may be just a very little, but that's how large these numbers are. And then last month in Nature, they came out saying that actually we believe we're underestimating the number of people with dementia globally. So this is a huge challenge, which is why I always, hopefully you can pick up on the passion that I have when I speak about this, because until we have a cure or we know how to reverse the damage that's already been done, how do we help one another, walk each other home, as Ram Dass would say? So I told you about the statistics of 1 out of 9, 65 and older, and then 1/3 of people 85 and older. We know that 2/3 of people who have Alzheimer's disease are women. We know that Black Americans have twice the risk factor. Hispanics and Native Americans have 1.5 times the risk factor. And the states who have older populations, I'm here in Scottsdale, Arizona, so we have very high numbers, as would places like Florida. So when we talk about this umbrella term, dementia, we're talking about that different domains of the brain are being impacted. There's a saying we have in the world of dementia: if you know one person with dementia, all you know is one person with dementia. Enormous variability from person to person. So I'm going to speak in generalities, and most people appreciate this information. So sit with me just as we kind of unpack this a little bit. In a general way, when we talk about memory, we're talking about the first part of memory to go is the short-term memory, right? So if you've ever had a colonoscopy, they've given you a medication and they've asked you, they'll say, we're going to give you this med, it's going to help you relax, and then we're going to start the procedure. So they give you the med, they walk away, and you shut your eyes for a minute and you open them up and you're waiting and waiting. A nurse comes by and you go, when am I having my colonoscopy? And the nurse says, you just had your colonoscopy. And we go, I did? Yes, and sip this apple juice, and once we know your stomach can tolerate it, you're out of here. So we're sipping our apple juice, and then we close our eyes for a minute. We open them up. Nurse walks by. Excuse me, when am I having my colonoscopy? And the nurse says, you just had it. And we go, I did? Because the medication that they gave us oftentimes is midazolam, Versed. And what that medication does is it stops the ability of you to encode information that you just received. So the evidence is that I'm listening, I'm paying attention, the nurse gives me an answer, it registers and makes me happy, I start sipping my apple juice, but just when that information would normally be encoded, so the next time my brain goes, did I just have colonoscopy? The brain will go, yeah, you did. The medication inhibits the information from being embedded, encoded. That is referred to as amnestic short-term memory. And that is the type of memory that starts in people, particularly with the Alzheimer's type of dementia. So if you have a person that you've loved who has dementia, you have probably had them ask you the same question over and over and over again, right? And no matter how many times you told them, if you look in their eyes, every time they ask you, it's the very first time for them. Just like, thank goodness, the colonoscopy nurse on the 15th time that he or she has been asked the question does not go, I told you, all those kinds of things, because they understand that with that medication, the person is doing the best they can and that they can't hold on to that info. So one of the more important things for you to know if you don't know, or to share with others who don't know, is that that part of the brain called the hippocampus is one of the first places where the brain cells begin to die and the connections between them. So that the person, of course, is going to ask you, but please remember that they're always doing the best they can. And you and I would exhibit the same behavior. So every time they ask you the same question, even though it's really hard for you, especially on a day when your patience has been tried, answer it as if it's the first time, meaning tone of voice, look in the eyes, energy you're bringing with your presence, all of that. And also remember that the short-term memory lapses have safety ramifications. You can say, please don't get up, the floor's slippery there. If you need anything, call me. Okay, you walk out of the room, clunk. Please don't go out without letting me know because I worry about you. All of those things, people can't be held accountable. When we don't know that simple fact, it's like holding up a book to a blind person, putting it really close to their face, turning up the light and going, I need you to try harder. Now read this thing here. We wouldn't do that with a blind person. And when we know about the true deficits that people with dementia have, it can help us navigate more skillfully. So would you like more information like that? Is that meaningful to you? Yes. Okay, all right, so we'll move forward. Okay, so yeah, actually, can I, Eileen, would it be okay if I keep the screen like this so that I can get feedback? Great. Okay, thank you. All right, who here by a show of hands has tried thinking and reasoning with the person who has dementia? How'd that work for you? Not so good, right? Yeah, so it's great to try because people with dementia, as you probably have experienced, have what's called windows of lucidity, where out of nowhere, you can look in their eyes and they get you and they say things that you're like, what? You know, windows of lucidity. They cannot make those happen. We cannot make those happen. So I do like trying to think and reason with someone if I think that they're moving into that ability. But when we try things and we see that they don't work, we have to choose another way. But oftentimes, when we love people, we keep trying it. You know, like as a person from Brooklyn, if you don't understand me, I'm going to lean in, I'm going to talk louder, I'm going to use my, because I'm thinking like this is going to help you, or is actually, it's just going to annoy you. So let's stop that because that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And we'll talk about different ways. But remember, thinking and reasoning is a lot of frontal lobe stuff. And once the disease hits up there, the person's going to have more trouble. The different types of dementia, and certainly I'm happy to answer questions about the different types, but people present initially different from one another depending upon the dementia they have. But because the dementias like Lewy body and Alzheimer's and the frontotemporals, because they are progressive neurodegenerative conditions, by the time that people move into the later stages, they look far more similar than different, whereas in the early stages, they can look quite different. And by the way, just so in case you don't read this literature, scientists believe that the changes in the brain that lead to Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia start 10 to 20 years before ever the first symptom is even noticed. Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about language, verbal language. There's expressive language. So up here in the brain, there's the ability to take your thoughts and feelings and to put words to them and express, expressive language. Then there's receptive language back here, which is, as I'm speaking to you, you're able to process the concepts. In dementia, both expressive and receptive abilities will be impaired over time. Some people are stronger in one than the other. So don't necessarily think that just because a person is having expressive problems like this, share expressive, right? Sometimes people who have expressive language problems still have good receptive language, so you can speak to them. You'll have to speak more slowly, and you'll want to use more visual cues because the brain takes in information more easily through the eyes than through the ears. But just don't think, I don't want you to think it's an equal equation necessarily where the deficits are. I wish somebody had also told me that language abilities change over the course of 24 hours. So if you have a person with dementia and let's say they're morning people, then this is a good time to have the back and forth. This is the good time to have family and friends visit. This is the good time to do a healthcare visit. But if at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're thinking, I'm not quite sure they're with us, or as I like to say, don't poke the bear time, this is not a time to be trying, to engage the person because we want to work with their residual abilities. Function sequencing planning, this frontal lobe stuff, once the disease hits here, the synapses, the connections between the brain cells and the brain cells themselves, once the disease is hitting up here, my start button isn't working. So I may not be able to initiate something even if I want to do it. So here's something that I hear all the time. He just sits there. And this was a person who was a real mover and a shaker. And oftentimes it's because their start button doesn't work. But if you help them engage in something, we call it priming the pump, then oftentimes you can like back off and the person will continue to do what they do. But also, just even getting dressed. I don't know if you've ever seen a person with dementia whose underwear is on the outside. It's because, let's say we put their clothes out, they lack the ability to be able to do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, that by the looks of things, you all got dressed this morning and nobody's underwear is on the outside. And you did that all without giving any thought to it, right? Neurons that fire together, wire together kind of thing. But once the wiring isn't happening, we really have to break things down into small, bite-sized, manageable chunks. Personalities can change in people with dementia. My little white-haired, sainted church lady turned into cursing like a drunken sailor with such finesse that we just followed behind her going, oh my God, I'm so sorry. If you knew who she was, she never would have done. We were doing all the, she was swinging at people and stuff. I don't know if you've had that. I hope you haven't, but just remember that our social behavior is all learned. When we came onto the planet, we just were consumed with our wants and needs, right? Wah, kind of thing. And then over time, we started to learn how to self-regulate and how to interact. And we developed, hopefully, a voice inside our head that says, don't say that out loud, kind of thing. But that's just a bunch of brain cells talking to one another, right? So once those brain cells are dead, we're going to see some raw behaviors, aren't we? So personalities will change, but again, bottom line, the person with dementia is doing the best that he or she can. And a lot of these behaviors that seem rude are just that their filter is gone. Or when they seem angry or even aggressive, the number one job of the human brain is to keep the body alive. And so if it's not perceiving the world around it, that it's safe and that it's not stressful, the person's going to go to their self-protective mode, and so would you and I, because this is just the way we're wired. So behaviors, dementia-related behaviors are usually the most stressful part about being a care partner. Behaviors will occur in over 90% of people who have dementia at some point along the trajectory of their decline. However, the message of hope is that when we as a society know better and do better, people with dementia will not be exhibiting behaviors because behaviors are an expression of an unmet need, are telling us that they're in distress in body, mind, or spirit. And once we learn how to create their world around them and respond to them more skillfully, that number is going to go way, way down. Insight and judgment. Some of you have had a loved one who, even from the very early stages, has not acknowledged that anything's wrong with them. And the classic example is explaining that it's too dangerous for them to drive. I'm a perfect driver. Well, look at the scrapes on the car. I didn't do it. Amnestic short-term memory. It's not denial, it's amnestic short-term memory. Well, here's the police report. That wasn't me. So there's this fancy word in the dementia world called anosognosia, the inability to have insight. So if it reaches certain parts of the brain, the person does not have the ability to be able to acknowledge it, no matter how much evidence you're presenting to them. They're doing the best they can. Even people who have dementia who are aware that something's different, than the way they once were. As dementia progresses, we'll more than likely move into that anosognosia. That can be a good news because it's so tormenting for so many people. Judgment will become more and more impaired, which means our job is to keep them safe and to keep others safe. And then lastly, as far as domains of the brain, I just want to talk about visual spatial orientation. So even if the person has 20/20 vision, remember the eyes just allow the signals to come in accurately, but then the information gets sent back here where the information gets processed. In other words, people with dementia who have good eyesight, you may think, well, they're going to be fine. But once the disease hits back here, they can't process how near, how far, how high, how low, and all of those things. So I'm going to just stop and breathe for a minute and say, did you learn anything yet? And as you know, usually in the world of dementia, as we learn these things, they have to sink in, and that takes time, and we have to hear it over and over again. But then as you apply it to your person, you really feel that it gives you more finesse in being able to navigate whatever arises. I don't want to get too nerdy, but I think for the visual learners, I'd like to share my screen for a minute and just show you a picture of the brain, which might help with the learning. So let me do this. And then let me do this. Let's see if I can pull this up. Okay, can you see this? Can you see
Yeah.
all of it? Okay, all right. So first of all, here is the healthy brain of an older adult. Nice and plump, right? But then we see that advanced Alzheimer's one. So in imaging, this would be referred to as atrophy, right? Shrinkage. And think about that. It's representing that hundreds of thousands of neurons have died, the connections. And so we still have the same human being with the same human needs, although they don't have the ability to meet those needs themselves. So I'm not sure, I'm going to do this. Hopefully you can see the right side of the screen. And can you see where my cursor is?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So let's say we sliced your brain down and then over here, whoops, let's say over. So here's a temporal lobe and here's a temporal lobe. So your ear, let's say your ear's right about here, your right and left ear. So if you took a pencil, sharp pencil, and you shoved it in your ear, don't do this at home, just kidding. But it would get to the middle part of the temporal lobe. And this area right in here, that big word is called the hippocampus. We have one on the right and one on the left. So the hippocampi have several jobs, and one of them is to take in that new information, right? So that's why in mental status exams, we say things like, I'm going to tell you 3 words, I want you to repeat them after me, and then hold on to them because I'm going to ask you later. So if we do that all now, you know, and I say, okay, I'm going to tell you 3 words. So table, apple, penny. And then you all say, table, apple, penny. And so I say, all right, so hold on to those because I'm going to ask you later. So now these hippocampal regions here are going table, apple, penny, 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 and it's encoding the information. All right, so let's go down to advanced dementia and compare it with the top picture. And what you see are very, very dramatic changes. And on imaging, they would be reporting hippocampal atrophy. So again, the cells whose job it is to take in new information aren't even there. This is biology. And we very tenderly and respectfully share this with family members because many of them know I should be more patient. I know I should. We're asking them to do really hard things in stressful situations. But my experience over the past 20 years of doing this is that when I share the pictures with them, they have aha moments. And it takes it from knowledge, if you will, to more of an embodied wisdom that they can carry forward. While we're on this slide, though, I'll just say that here's the front of the brain, here's the back part of the brain. In the Alzheimer's model of dementia, this blue-gray area in the temporal zone is saying this is where we think the pathology begins, and it shows up as short-term memory problems and word finding, word understanding difficulties. They just released a global report about 2 months ago, and the majority of people in the world think that dementia is a chronic illness. They don't understand that this is a progressive terminal condition. But these images here in the middle are showing us that, see what's happening? The disease is spreading in all these blue-gray areas. And by the time they get to hospice and they're in the advanced stage, we say that the disease has gone global. In other words, again, we have this very vulnerable person who has all of the same needs, but now is having difficulty in their world. So what do you think about that? Does anybody have any questions or comments before we move forward? Yes, Candace?
My husband is in the early stages of Lewy body with Parkinson's, and I've noticed that his the visual spatial um, is one of the first things that I noticed. That he can't drive anymore, and he used to be able to be very mechanical, but he can't solve mechanical problems anymore. I think because of the visual spatial, as well as the sequencing component.
Yes, and Candace, when we talk about specifically Lewy body, we know that what I'm listening for in people from the very beginning is not only the Parkinson-like symptoms, but the visual spatial and visual hallucinations.
Yes.
Those are things that are really can come up pretty close in the front. Are you familiar with the organization? There's two organizations that are amazing. One is go to lbda.org. They're phenomenal, Candace. And they also have what's called the Lewy Learning Center for professionals and for families and stuff. Rich, up-to-date, evidence-based. Endless. You'll be pointing and clicking, and you'll really find some there's support groups too, particularly of families with Lewy body dementia. And the other one is all one word, lewybodyresources.org.
Thank you. Can I ask you another question? About a week ago when I woke up, my husband was in bed with all of his clothes on. And he didn't have speech or language at first to describe what had happened. It came back within 10 or 15 minutes. And he told me that he thought it was a work day and he'd gotten up and gotten dressed and then realized it wasn't and then got back into bed. But because there was this speech problem and confusion, I thought that it might be a TIA or a stroke. And in the emergency room, all those things were ruled out. And our neurologist said that he called it a Lewy event.
Yeah. So people with Lewy body are known for having autonomic dysfunction. So their autonomic nervous system can kind of punk out on them at certain points. It's good that you thought about a TIA as well. But yeah, so they have autonomic dysfunction, so their blood pressures can drop, et cetera. Additionally, Lewy body, as compared to other forms of dementia, have what's called fluctuations in level of cognition, where one moment they're like this, I can test them, they get this beautiful score. Next time I see them, I'm like, I must have had such an off day because this is not matching. And then I'm like, oh, right, Lewy body, right? And the thing, Candace, for you to know and for all Lewy body families to know is when you see your person being able to do something on one day, and then the next day you need their help, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, they're acting like they can't do it, and you're thinking, hey, bud, yesterday when you wanted to do something that you seem to be able to have the ability, and yet meanwhile today you don't seem to have it. They have no control over it, over those levels of fluctuation.
That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. There was one other thing I was going to say about that. Oh, and remember when I talked about the hippocampus and we looked at those pictures? Okay, so the hippocampus has other jobs as well, besides of taking in new information and encoding it. And another one is navigating visual spatial, helping with visual spatial navigation. And the other one is the passage of time. So, sometimes I would have said, it's time for a shower today. I just took a shower. No, that was 3 weeks ago. Now I just took a shower. So you can see how all of these behaviors are, again, I'm trying to like fast forward us from the archaic approach that we used to have of people with dementia and really illustrate that this is simply biology and the person is doing the best that he or she can in any given moment.
Yeah.
So I think that because this is Befriending Death class, I think I'll just quickly go through like the stages, if that's helpful. And then I want to talk about, so what do you do? What are the plans you can make? What are the ducks you need to get in a row, so to speak? So in that early stage, lots of
Maribeth,
time. Oh,
Maribeth,
yes.
can I just ask a question? It pertains to the progression. Like if someone has early onset or moderate dementia, they might likely die from something different, like a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. But in the healthy body, like say, you've got a physically fit person, but their brain is impacted and they get to the advanced stage. Do they die from dementia? Like, what is the actual cause of death for them?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. Yes. So remember, okay, so it's moving through the brain. And one of the jobs of the brain is to coordinate swallowing. So the next time you mindfully swallow, you don't even think about it, but you've got to get this liquid all together, get it on the back of the tongue, the airway has to shut off, and then it goes down the esophagus. As people move into the advanced stage, they have more and more swallowing difficulties and eating difficulties. We've got all these tips and tricks in order to facilitate successful swallowing until it gets to a certain point where even if we're helping during the day with them eating and drinking, that at night, oftentimes they can have what's called a silent aspiration, which just means some saliva goes into their airway. And because at this point they're usually more frail, less mobile because of gait instability, etc., they're set up for what's called an aspiration pneumonia. Aspiration pneumonia is one of the most common causes of death, but it's due to dementia. And we're trying to get that put on more death certificates because otherwise it's skewing the numbers. But as long as we're already at death, can I just say, researchers have actually studied different ways that we die as human beings. And when aspiration pneumonia or sepsis, when an infection goes into the bloodstream, when those are leading up to death, if they're treated by hospice professionals, researchers have established that it's one of the most comfortable ways we can pass as human beings. We will not have a desire for food. We'll stop eating, but we won't be hungry. Years ago, I'm an older nurse, so I remember that people used to die in the hospital. And when you go in the hospital, oh, you get an IV. And we thought that because they weren't taking in fluids, we're going to give them fluids to make them better. But what we learned by the 90s was the body in its infinite wisdom knew it couldn't handle fluids anymore and it was shutting down. And so by us putting IVs in, we were creating more symptom burdens. Swelling in the lower extremities, in the belly, even, in the respiratory system and stuff. And so now we realize this natural slowing down, this desire not to eat anymore, not to drink anymore. When we don't drink anymore, our kidneys slow way down. When our kidneys slow way down, it kicks out endorphins to the body to blunt the pain nerve endings. And people get sleepier and sleepier. but they still have moments of wakefulness and they hear things and they can feel your touch. So you can be present with them. You can pray, you can play music, you can have the dog on the bed. We've wheeled beds out to be under trees so that as people are in their waking and they're sleeping, and then they go into this really deep sleep and they pass, and it's usually very comfortable. And when we treat it as hospice professionals, we're looking very hard for any symptoms of discomfort. And if it is the goal of the person, then we will treat them accordingly. So we just jumped to death. But does anybody have any questions about that?
Yeah, hi, I have a question. This is
Hello.
Ralph. Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. Unmuted. So this is very helpful. Thank you. I'm just curious what your views are on all these videos on the internet. I know the science isn't quite there yet on like calling Alzheimer's a type 3 diabetes, and like you should really minimize your sugar. And so I've seen a video of a woman who said she gave coconut oil to her husband and he's, did much better. So anyway, okay, I can see your response. I'm just curious. I
Good.
what your thought? Thanks.
I'm curious too, Ralph. It's not that I don't believe people when they say this, but right now in the United States, there's over 7 million people with Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's is only one dementia. So when I hear about the story of 1 or 2 people with coconut oil and they were cured, that is an N of 1. So yay for them. That's fabulous, isn't it? But I think we're dealing with far more complicated, even when we know, okay, so Alzheimer's is the one we know the most about. However, we're still learning that we're still trying to figure it out. What we thought was Alzheimer's disease, now there's different types of Alzheimer's disease. It's getting more and more and more specialized. That hypothesis about type 3 has probably been around probably for at least 15 years. I've heard it argued by experts. But I will say that when I look at the scientific literature, sugar seems to have a correlation with neuroinflammation, right? So, or at least, so consequently, I'm really open to continuing to search down that road. But I think that it's not one answer. I think there's going to be a whole lot of, it's going to be multifactorial. Any other questions? Well, then I think
Can I
yes.
ask a quick question? Is there certain forms of Alzheimer's that are more genetically related
Yes.
and those that are not?
Yeah. So some of the, I don't know if you ever saw like 60 Minutes, there's this real rare form in Medellin, Colombia, where by the time they're in their 30s, at least 50% of the people in the family are going to have it, and they're going to have it that young. Fortunately, they've been kind enough to allow researchers to go work with them in order to gather important pieces of information. So there are some types that are genetic, but it's so rare, Mara. When we talk about the genetic stuff for most of us, what we're looking for is the APOE4 gene. And so how that plays out is that if we get one from one parent, our risk goes up. If we get one from both parents, our risk goes up even higher. But it is not destiny. There will be people who have 2 copies of that and don't get it. However, again, risks will go up.
Okay. Can I ask one other follow-up question on that one in particular? Because in reading about that, there's so much that so many other kind of gene sequencing that has to come into play that will, as you say, really tell you whether or not you're at risk. So I struggle with whether or not I should take that test and find out if I'm my dad had Alzheimer's, so APOE4. And I've opted not to because it feels like the literature is like you say, yes, you may carry it, but it's not destiny. So, okay, what's the value?
Yeah, and so more importantly, perhaps, is so what are the evidence-based practices that I can use in my life in order to, if not prevent, delay onset? Because Mara, the way I look at it is, if I delay it long enough, I'll be dead, or I'll be close to dead. So good enough. You
Right.
know what I mean? Now, there are practices evidence-based, and the latest place, if you want to look for it, is the oldest medical journal in the whole world is The Lancet, Lancet. And The Lancet, about 2 months ago, published 14 evidence-based preventative factors that we can bring into our lives.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so I would stay more focused on that while they're working on it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so where I think we'll go through instead of the progression, unless anybody wants to go, is there. So what should I know if I get diagnosed with dementia, or what do I need to know for my folks? Okay. When we look at the international literature, it lets us know that to optimize well-being for the person living with dementia and their care partners, there are certain elements that are essential. One is education. Like I'm sharing with you now, do you feel that this could help you be a better care partner? So yes, education, which type of dementia, if your person has a specific type, like learning about with Candace about, Lewy body, it's got its own factors that are really important to know about. So knowing maybe what type of dementia, how does this progress? What are the common complications that occur? So this will not be news to anybody who has been a dementia caregiver, but people who have dementia, if they get urinary tract infections, suddenly they can get paranoid, they can start falling more, they can have alterations in sleep-wake cycles, all these kinds of things. So what are the common complications that arise so that when they arise, I can go, you know what this sounds like? And so naturally, we always want to seek earlier intervention than later, right? So education. And just so that you know, oh gosh, there's just so much education out there now, fortunately. And on my website, my hospice's website, Dementia Campus, all one word, .org, there's videos of me sharing this stuff like during the COVID days and stuff. There's videos on behaviors, on common behavioral approaches, all this, just a lot of information out there, fortunately. Okay, education, that's the first thing. Second, dementia care partners have very high morbidity and mortality rates. And if you've been one, I do not need to explain to you why you might have higher morbidity and mortality rates, right? In any laboratory stressed, if they talk about they want to stress out rats, what they do is create unpredictable environments, and then it raises the cortisol in the rats and stuff. Well, if you're a dementia care partner, you're living in a very unpredictable environment. And just when you think things are about to calm down, boom, something else comes up, So we want to provide emotional support for dementia care partners. Now, you may say, I'm not really a support group kind of person. Perhaps you would want to reconsider identifying as a support group type of person, and not all support groups are the same, right? You want to find the right fit, but please make sure that you have people who will support you for this journey. And also, let me say something about grief. There are particular types of grief that dementia care partners have. And it begins at the time you start to notice changes in the person that you love. And by the time it's diagnosed, boom, more grief is coming on. So I'll just name 3 types of grief. One is called disenfranchised grief. If you have never been around a person with dementia or lived this experience, you really don't have any idea what this journey is like until you step into this world. So if you're a dementia care partner, but you're in a world of people who don't know what dementia caregiving is really like, they're going to say some things to you that they're trying to comfort you, and you're going to get pissed or frustrated, Oh, thank you for nodding your head. Yeah, but, and so this disenfranchised, it's like the world is going on, the parade's walking by you, but you're stuck here. The dreams you had are no longer going to come true. Your friends are going, if you need anything, let me know. But then where the heck did they go? It seems like everybody disappeared. Disenfranchised grief. The next one's called anticipatory grief. You are looking at your life, and this is not the way that you had thought that it was going to play out. And you're still in the middle of it. You have to look down this long road. What's that going to be like? More and more anticipating loss. And the one that's got really robust research around it, and I highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with this, is called ambiguous loss. And so even if you just go to one word, ambiguousloss.com, this is that your person's here, but they're not here the way they once were. So let's say I'm a wife, but now I kind of feel like a mother. I'm an adult child, but now I don't really feel like I have my mom. I feel like I'm her mom. So it's this ambiguity in the relationships and the roles. And the human brain loves certainty, doesn't it? It's like, pick a lane. But being a dementia care partner makes us straddle these worlds, which is real crazy making emotional, fodder, if you will. So I wanted to talk about grief because whenever your person changes, whenever they say something to you that isn't the way that they would have said stuff, oh, it's just another arrow in the heart. And so I want to name it to tame it and to say you're not going crazy, but this is grief. Please honor it. Be tender with yourself and seek support. And why I like the ambiguousloss.com, Dr. Pauline Boss, who's an expert in this, is she names it, but then she goes on to evidence-based approaches for how do we optimize your well-being, get you through this now and point it towards the future. Okay. So I'm giving you a lot. Okay, so I've talked about educational information, emotional support, and now we talk about the resources that are instrumental. You got to get your financial ducks in a row. Dementia oftentimes costs 3 times more than other conditions because of the loss of work or the in-home care, all of those considerations. Is your name on the document of these individuals so that when they are losing their insight and judgment and are falling prey to predators, that you have some control over them losing all of their money? Do you have legal paperwork? Who is the medical power of attorney? Who's the durable power of attorney? These are so important, not only for you, but also as a human rights issue. While people with dementia still have the capacity to make decisions, we want them to be firmly seated in saying what matters most to them and how they want their life to play out, right? We want to honor their dignity of choice, and what it will help at some point, it will lessen the strain of you making difficult decisions, because we in the know will not say, what do you want us to do for your mom? We're going to say skillfully, if your mother, as you have known her, could see herself as she is now, what would she choose to do? We want to honor her dignity of choice. And some of you may not know, and so these are good questions to have. And just because somebody has dementia doesn't mean that in regards to certain issues, they still know, or you can use your best guess. So legal, financial. Also, are you familiar with respite opportunities? Meaning, do you know what adult day clubs are? There can be fabulous places for people with dementia to go. It's like the bar Cheers, where everybody knows your name, and the person with dementia walks in, everybody goes, Norm! And they feel a sense of belonging and purpose, which, remember, this person, until they draw their last breath, needs to feel reciprocity in the world. They need to feel seen, heard, and valued. And we can do that. Also, do you know what palliative care is? Palliative care is not hospice. The word palliative scares people. Palliative just means comfort symptom management. Early on in a terminal condition, people don't need much palliative care, although it's nice to be acquainted with it. But as it progresses, we want to focus on quality of life versus quantity of days, don't we? And so more and more palliative dementia care programs are emerging. And then at the very end, as the person reaches the last 6 months of life, are you familiar with hospice? That hospice does dementia. Not all hospices are dementia capable, but you want that. And remember, hospice not only serves the person with the condition, hospice serves the patient's family loosely defined by whoever the people, so that we can skillfully support you as well, all the way to the end. And then for 13 months afterwards, we offer free bereavement services to help you through that anniversary date. Do you know about in-home care? It's really expensive. about memory cafes where people with dementia and their care partners can go. All of these different resources. When care partners are made aware of this stuff, it really makes the journey better. So can I go on, or do we have questions, or? Yes. You're muted, I think.
Could you repeat this thing about respite? What were you talking about? Places to go, or what was it that you were saying?
Well, so let's think about, well, first of all, you need time to yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't need it now, you're gonna. So let's find out pleasant ways to make that happen. So first of all, can we have like an adult day club or memory cafes? More and more cities are showing these memory cafes. You can Google it in your town. Whenever you have questions related to dementia, go to your local Alzheimer's Association or Area Agency on Aging. Those are kind of the two places that I know we're all in different geographic places, but they should be able to at least point you in directions. So these memory cafes, you and your person can go and you can socialize. Adult day is where you can leave the person there. They'll be cared for. They'll have socialization and arts and enjoyment, and you can have the day to yourself. Then, as far as respite, there's in-home care. You got to figure out who's reputable. And just because they're in-home care, are they dementia skilled, right? So that you can bring somebody in. Also, there are respite places that for, let's say you need to have surgery or you need to go to a family event. We want you to still be engaged in your life. So there's places for them to go, let's say for 5 days while you go. Yeah. So finding out about that. And of course, the worst time to look for information is when you're in a crisis. So what you should do ahead of time is try to figure these out. Or if you've got a savvy friend, the friends who say, if I can do anything for you, let me know. And we go, oh, okay, thank you. These are the kind of things that you could act, because usually with people who haven't lived dementia, you've got to tell them what to do. And the most skillful way to do that is, I have a list of things that I need done. Would you consider looking over it and finding the one that you feel comfortable doing? Isn't that a nice finesse? So it keeps your friendship. It doesn't make people feel uncomfortable. And people, some of us are really good helpers, but we really suck at asking for help. I don't know if there's any of us here. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Any other questions before we go forward? All right. So I'm going to start to stray from the science of dementia into the art of dementia, from the science to the art of the heart, the soul of dementia. So I showed you the pictures of the brain and all the shrinkage, the cortical atrophy, as we say. Then there's the middle part of our brain where the limbic system is, right? The emotional processing place. And yes, this part of the brain is also impacted, but nowhere near as severely. So I'm going to clarify that just a little more deeply. Up here in front is our ability to regulate our emotions. There will come a time when your person will not be able to regulate their emotions. So, and we all know as brilliant human beings, not to say to another human being as a helpful statement, you need to calm down. That has never worked, and I don't think it ever will, right? So of course, we're not going to say that to our person with dementia, because again, they're doing the best they can. But they lose their ability to intrinsically regulate their emotions. However, the great news is we can, from the outside in, help them regulate their emotions. So I was saying about the higher cortical regions, we saw all the shrinkage, the atrophy. I can't change the way a person with dementia, their ability to think and function, but I can change the way they feel. So that there is the message of hope. Because remember, Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body, frontotemporal, etc. These are diseases of the brain, but they're not diseases of the heart, the soul, whatever terminology you want to use that you're comfortable with. The language of the brain is verbal language, blah, 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 blah. The language of the heart and soul, everybody here is fluent in. And so this is a call back to when this isn't working, the verbal language, come down into here. This is where presence really is going to help you out. So Maya Angelou also has this phrase about people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget the way you made them feel, right? It's interesting that memory, as it fades in people with dementia, it starts with the short term and then starts to go back like a retrogenesis, you know? And so we can use that amnestic short-term memory in case we make a mistake. Let's say we approach the person and they get really aggravated, right? And so we want to backpedal. So it's really nice to say, oh, I'm so sorry. And then leave the room, like go to the bathroom or something like that. And then know that in about 5 minute time, you can come and you can readdress it. And you get as many do-overs as you need to because of this amnestic memory until you get it right. And everything in our world is trial and error, you know? Every once in a while, you'll use that principle and it will fail. And it's because emotions take a fact and make it stickier in the brain, even for people who have memory problems, as compared to just a fact. So let me use, okay, I think not all of you are old enough to remember this, but so you can say like, have you ever been in a parking lot and like you don't exactly know where you parked your car? Is that, yeah, me too. So, but meanwhile, if I say, do you remember when you heard about 9/11? Do you remember where you were? Blah, 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 blah. Now, isn't that interesting? So let's say you parked your car just this morning or something, but you don't necessarily remember the exact space, but you can remember that. Why? Because emotions make facts and make them stickier. So I've had, when I've interacted sometimes with a person with dementia, and I've said something and it was like, oh, damn, I shouldn't have said that. And so I see that they're angry with me and I'm like, I'm so sorry. First of all, you got to learn how to apologize because you got to ask yourself the question, do you want to be happy and peaceful or do you want to be right? And may I advise choosing happiness and peace? So then you go, okay, you excuse yourself and you buy your time, 5 minutes, and you come back and you readdress. And sometimes the person's still angry at you. They don't know why, but they're still angry at you. So emotions are stickier. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that into the mix in case it happens to you. But let's go on to this limbic system, the emotional processing place. So when we think about what impacts the limbic system, it's the five senses or however many senses that you have left, right? So who here has ever put food in their mouth to make themselves feel better? I'm not talking about nutrition. I'm talking about exactly. And how quickly did it work? The first bite started, right? Quicker than IV push medication. When we were infants, the first way we learned how to self-soothe was sucking our thumb, oral stimulation. And so oral stimulation is very calming for the brain, even for people who have dementia. So we use food all the time as medicine, if you will, to create a comfortable environment. When it gets to advanced dementia by this point, this is when we're using primarily soft and sweet, because it seems to be the ticket, especially in advanced dementia. There's lots of soft and sweet options, ice cream, yogurt, smoothies, just, and you can nutrient dense them if you want, you know, just by throwing other things in there with them. And so, okay, so food. And it's not about meals per se, because that requires attention, decision-making, long periods of time. Instead, what we do is we graze throughout the day. And we don't say, would you like blah, 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 blah. Instead, we take something that we know somebody would like. We give them the visual cue, right? Because words may not be working. And we say, have a bite of this. It's delicious. And oftentimes the mouth will, and once the first bite is in, the brain, when it registers, especially if it's sweet, right? It's going to the reward centers of the brain goes more, you know, because once the brain knows it's safe, usually the next thing it's going for is pleasure, pleasure. So we use food all the time, and that's how we keep people happy and comfortable. Okay, let's talk about touch. So we live in these animal bodies, don't we? We're just these mammals. And so much of the time, the squeeze of a hand, the hug, these things can say so much more than words ever can. So, and we talk about in the world of dementia, living in, it's high touch, low tech. When I think about the olden days of dementia care, we kept them cleaned, but we weren't giving them nurturing touch. We were just keeping them clean. That institutional touch, and I wonder how many of my folks died earlier than they needed to from failure to thrive syndrome because they weren't receiving what a mammal needs, to move on and to feel connected. I'll give you a tip here that's really helpful. Have you ever been in a hospital and they ask you if you want a warm blanket? And they put the right? Okay. So next time that happens, really be present for the experience fully. It's so much more than just the warmth on your skin. Like body, mind, and spirit, you go. And again, quicker than IV push medication. So what we do is we take bath towels, beach towels, fleece blankets, and we put them in the dryer for 5 minutes and we toast them up. And then we say, I've got a treat for you. And we wrap them, like swaddle them. And again, I can't emotionally regulate necessarily from the inside out, but these things help me from the outside in calm down. We use it for when people are upset or they look like they're getting a little restless. We use it for people who have difficulty going to sleep, middle of the night waking. All of these, this is making sense, right? So how we're using the senses. All right, so, and there's just so much more I could say, but anyway, so let's move on to the next sense which is smell. Smell, some people with dementia have a sense of smell, other people don't. So for those who do, remember that we just moved through a holiday season that when okay, well, first Halloween. So then everything was pumpkin, right? Pumpkin, pumpkin, cinnamon, clove, then we moved into the holidays where it's evergreen, blah, 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 blah. And a lot of us loved that, it was uplifting. And then think about our cleaning products that they're lemon scented, they're citrus scented because that is uplifting. As many of you probably use lavender because it can be soothing. Or where are you from? Are you from the beach? Are you from the mountains? Are you from all of these smells? And the interesting thing is the way we were created is that in our cranial nerves, there's one cranial nerve that goes directly to the limbic system, and that's the sense of smell. Goes right to change the way I feel before it even elevates to what I'm thinking. And it's probably because you need to know if fire's there. You don't need to think about it. You just need to smell it and get the heck out, right? But anyway, so smell for people, if they still have that ability, can be really, really pleasant and bring them to another place. Then let's talk about sound. So my master's and doctoral work was focused on using music because it is the last parts of the brain to deteriorate. Apparently, some of them have to do with music because music is processed in so many ways. So we use music, which is called the language of the soul, right? So disease-free area. I bet that if you have had a person with dementia, you have seen their response to music, and that people who can't talk can sing. But think about music in your own life. You want some energy? You pump it up. You want to relax? Down. Music can also be used as, until people draw their last breath, they want to be able to express their internal experience. I mean, while they're still conscious. And so to sit with somebody and to play a song and say, I'm imagining this is the way you feel, and just allowing the music to to serve as the vehicle. Or especially as people are nearing the end of life, or they simply need to draw strength from music, let's say hymns or whatever type of music provides that for them, provides them with transcendence. For me, nature and the sounds of nature are really important, and more studies are being used about like the sounds of birds singing, et cetera, and well-being. Can you play that in the environment, even if the person can't get out? So really get creative with sounds, or maybe sounds from the person's past, crickets or whatever. All right, so we've talked about taste, touch, sight. Oh, well, we didn't smell, sound. Now let's talk about sight. So again, number one way that the brain takes in information is through the eyes. So if the person can still see, it will allow them so much of seeing a smiling face, right? The person may forget who we are, but they can always read if we're a friendly presence, right? If you have been in a country where you did not speak any of the language, your eyes really helped you take in whether the person in front of you was being offensive or threatening or respectful or kind. And so we take all of that in, but let's say a lot of people with dementia say, I want to go home, I want to go home. And it's a place like 50 years ago in Kansas, and they can't go back there and stuff. But remember now with our smartphones and YouTube videos, we can go anywhere in the universe that there's a video. And so you can bring people there. Or if they love babies or they love puppies, just bringing them this visual thing at periods throughout the day, it's getting easier and easier to do that. Or what about using old pictures, showing them pictures of themselves? As people with dementia time travel, oftentimes they think that they're younger than they are, right? So, a mom may still think she's got 6 young kids. Or this old man is trying to kiss her, and she's like, who's this old fart trying to kiss me? And meanwhile, she thinks she still has this young buck of a husband, kind of thing. And so we go there with the photos and stuff to take them wherever they are. Okay, so those are the 5 senses. Now I want to say my patients have been my greatest teachers, and always before I give a talk, I say a prayer that hopefully that I convey what's important, from their perspective and what they've taught me. And when it comes to spiritual practices, this is where I've seen things that I just will never be able to explain. It's way beyond science. I've seen people who had deeply embedded spiritual practices in their younger years who then for decades didn't. And I'll say to the adult children, hey, I see that mom used to be a Catholic. What do you think? Oh, and she hasn't done it, blah, 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 blah. But because of the time traveling thing, I might play like Ave Maria, or might put on the recitation of the rosary or say the Lord's Prayer. And it's interesting because the person will start reciting it right with me. So it's good to check it out to see if that's where the person is. I was in Fargo, North Dakota for 6 months of my life, which as a person from Brooklyn, New York, that was like going to Mars. And because I didn't know the culture, I didn't know the background, and I was a cancer nurse there. And it was really interesting because these Norwegian bachelor farmers, nobody had any pain. They were really, really stoic, which is like on a cancer floor, and I really had to learn the nuances to what they would be willing to share and not. But I also learned that the best medicine I could do for these guys was to put their John Deere caps on, to get them in a wheelchair, regardless of the weather, to get them outside, to smell and to feel the prairie wind on their face, and how it just enlivened them, So when I talk about spiritual practices, it's really, really broad, but let us never forget the whole person with dementia and try all of these different aspects. Okay, so I'm going to stop.